Welcome to the What Should Progressives Do About Joe Biden forum that we're having live here on Tuesday night, sponsored by rootsaction.org. So first off, we're going to hear from each of the panelists, and the first one on the list here is Jeff Cohen, a journalist, media critic, founder of FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and co-founder of rootsaction.org. So Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Norman. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. In 2020, after RootsAction had supported Bernie in the primaries, we launched a major campaign, Vote Trump Out, then Challenge Biden. And we sent resources to defeat Trump in 3 states, Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin. All 3 Biden narrowly won. In those 3 states now, Biden is trailing Trump in the polls, although Wisconsin's very close. Biden's approval rating is as low, almost as low as it's been in the whole presidency. The stick with Biden advocates are right about one thing, that today's polls can't predict what's going to happen November 5th. But they're wrong when they think that you can make up these polling deficits without a big grassroots army of seasoned and enthusiastic get out the vote activists. And the bigger problem than voter disaffection from Biden, as shown in the polls, is activist disaffection. Young activists, racial justice activists are disaffected over several issues, not just the Gaza bloodbath. Climate activists who worked so hard to defeat the drill baby drill Trump in 2020, they're disaffected. I covered the September march in New York City, where most of the placards, most of the chants, most of the speakers were criticizing Biden over his reversals or failures on climate policy. Arab and Muslim American activists worked hard to get out the vote against the Islamophobic Trump in 2020. And today, even in swing states, they're announcing in public forums, no ceasefire in Gaza, no votes for Biden. If Biden leads the Democrats to defeat in November, it will help the extremist MAGA right wing up and down the ballot. The polls suggest that a generic Democrat, almost any Democrat, does better against Trump than Biden. And that's because of the unpopularity of the GOP brand, if that's where the focus is and it's not focused on Biden. The GOP denialism around climate, around abortion, around gun control, around even the peaceful transfer of power. RootsAction launched the Don't Run Joe, now stepasidejoe.org campaign right after the November 2022 congressional elections, which did not end up as bad as people expected. But a wise Democratic Congress member, not a very brave one, told the New York Times anonymously that Biden had been, quote, a huge drag on Democratic candidates. They won in spite of the president, not thanks to him. When mainstream journalists talk to us about Step Aside Joe, they too are puzzled that these elected Democrats won't say publicly what they've said privately, which is they have great fears that Biden can't win. At RootsAction, we've never worried about currying favor with the White House. So more than a year ago, we were running ads on TV, Don't Run Joe, MSNBC, CNN in Washington, D.C., Georgia, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Michigan. We took out full-page ads in the print edition of The Hill, which is seen all throughout the Capitol and the White House. One of the ads depicted congressional Democrats with their heads in the sand. We've been quoted regularly in media. We've published dozens of national columns, all with this simple message, and I'm winding down, that Joe Biden steps aside so that there can be an open primary process with democratic debates, small d and capital D, that can hopefully produce a more dynamic presidential candidate who's more in touch with the activist base of the party and can inspire young people and others in ways that Joe Biden cannot. We'd hope that other groups would join us. We hope that Cornel West would run against Biden within the Democratic primaries. It didn't happen. Our plan now is quickly to focus on defending the brave Congress members in the squad who have stood up for a ceasefire and now being targeted by the racist AIPAC and its millions of dollars. We'll keep pushing on Biden a tiny bit longer to step aside and in hopes that progressive activism and enthusiasm can return to this crucial battle of defeating the neo-fascists up and down the ballot, including at the top of the ballot.
Thank you, Jeff Cohen. And our next speaker is Karen Bernal, a longtime political organizer, former chair of the California Democratic Party Progressive Caucus.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I come at this from a very different angle. First off, in my day job, I work for the California legislature. I work as an aide to a state senator here. And so I see how policy affects people a little bit more directly, at the state level. And why do I bring this up? Well, because I have felt for quite some time now that the way that progressive organizations have had to kind of suck it up, as you will, and advocate for really terrible candidates at the top of the ticket because of what the other side represents. I feel that is a losing proposition, not just for the voters, but also for the credibility of those progressive influencers and organizations themselves. If they want to risk, their credibility, they will go to that playbook again. But the tragic thing is, yes, we all know that the down ticket races are going to suffer on account of that. But I also believe that because we have an ever more educated electorate, especially with the younger generation, that I'm making the case that I don't want to say don't ever talk about what to do about Biden, but basically kind of give up on Biden and any coattails that he can provide for those down ticket races, because in my view, he does not provide any coattails, and if anything, we risk the votes to important state legislative races for candidates that need to be elected if we tie them so much to what's happening at the top of the ticket. After all, I'm just going to say it. For what Biden has done and his administration, he honestly should be brought up on charges at The Hague, along with Netanyahu and others. It is hard for a progressive organization, therefore one that's been long respected and who provides lots of guidance and influence, to be then calling for people to vote for Biden. I say that a better strategy here is to start to talk about what is at stake in these down ticket races, and obviously the squad being the exception to that. We need to make sure that they go back to where they are right now. Why do I say this? Well, let's take an example. Just a few weeks ago, it was reported that the Supreme Court is going to be taking up the morning after pill. We see also that what's happening with local school districts all around the country with school book bans and curriculum. These are all things that directly impact people where they live, and therefore, who is in the state legislature, who is in make these local elections, that is much more impactful on a day-to-day basis to a person's life. And for let's face it, for the average working poor, especially people in frontline and fast food industries, a lot of the younger people who have those jobs, they already feel that life is crap at the bottom, and that they increasingly do not see the relevance that presidential politics has in their lives. And as a result, especially with what's going on in Gaza and in Palestine, and they're watching this in real time on social media and seeing the failures of this administration, making that case to them is only going to alienate them more. It is actually better to be able to point out the policies that are going to impact them should certain legislators be elected to office where they live in the states where they live, because that's really what's at stake after all at the end of the day. So with that, Norman, that's kind of my opening spiel here. And yes, you're not going to hear from me to advocate for Biden. I just can't do it. But what I can tell people is, if they don't already know who they're voting for at the state level, then that's a dangerous thing. And they need to know, because guess what? Those policies are going to be the things that affect their lives.
Thank you, Karen Bernal. And our next speaker is Max Elbaum. He's on the editorial board of Convergence Magazine. He's co-editor with Linda Burnham and Marla Poblet of the book Power Concedes Nothing: How Grassroots Organizing Wins Elections.
Thanks for having me, Norman, and everyone at RootsAction. It's no secret that we're living through some very difficult times, and we're facing a very difficult situation. We're in the most intense phase of the 60-year backlash against the gains of the 1960s for racial justice, gender justice, the anti-Vietnam War, and all the other progressive gains of that period. And that backlash has been led by two of the most powerful forces in U.S. politics. A sector of the ruling class, especially in the fossil fuel industry, and a bunch of right-wing billionaires, and all those layers of the population who are invested in racial and gender hierarchies. And that's brought us to a very difficult point. And it forced, after Trump's election in 2016, an alignment between forces who have big differences on political issues: the centrist wing of the Democratic Party, the corporate wing, and the emerging progressive movement that in 2016 was most represented by Bernie's campaign, the George Floyd uprising, and all of that. And there's tension between the progressive wing and the corporate wing on every single issue, especially now on the issues of Gaza and foreign policy, and on immigration and the so-called crisis at the border, which is really a crisis of the fact that people do not have the right to stay home and live decent lives in many countries of the world that are negatively affected by U.S. wars, climate change, exploitation, and so on. In 2016, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, the progressive wing of the social justice movement generally, made an absolutely decisive contribution to defeating MAGA. We mobilized and worked on those voters who are termed low propensity voters. They're really low investment voters, meaning that people don't invest in them. We're not around. The mainstream parties, both parties, are not there day in and day out fighting on those issues, the points that Karen just made. They only ask for their vote at election time and then desert them. And it's the grassroots organizations, power building organizations in the states, some progressive trade unions and so on, that are there year round and offer people a path. Fear of MAGA is not enough. You have to offer people a path to a better life. We have to treat voters and the people, especially in these neglected communities, as the intelligent, sophisticated people that they are. which is they know they're not going to, under the best case scenario, they're not going to get everything they want the day after the election. And progressives can't promise that. But we have to promise a path. We have to have a vision. And right now, the two areas that are the most tense in terms of offering a vision, that path, if we can defeat MAGA, are around immigration and the border and around Gaza and foreign policy. We have to make the struggle for Palestinian rights an integral component of the fight against MAGA. We have to make the struggles of immigrants and those people who are without documents here an integral part, so that an injury to one is an injury to all. Biden has positioned himself. He's the symbol of U.S. complicity with the genocide going on in Gaza right now. That has to change. Our immediate tasks, we have to build the ceasefire movement. We have to defend every person in Congress who's advocating a ceasefire. We have to change the terrain so that we force the issue of at least a minimal recognition of Palestinian rights and dignity and life into the campaign. This is one of the key things. We have to do that on every issue across the board, so people are motivated in order to see a path to something positive, and not only the existential threat posed by the Trump administration. That raises complex issues of how we deal with Biden. Bill Fletcher and I wrote a piece in The Nation about we have to force a change in U.S. policy or push Biden to step aside if that's at all possible.
Thank you, Max Elbaum. And our next speaker is Alan Minsky, a longtime journalist, and Alan is the executive director of Progressive Democrats of America.
Norman, it's great to join you, and it's been a very interesting evening for me because I think as the folks I'm on the call with know, going back 9 months even, I was very vocal in worrying about the progressive movement, which appeared on the stage of American history in a reborn manner in 2016. In my political analysis as executive director of Progressive Democrats of America, the organization most associated with drafting Bernie Sanders to run for president, to run as a Democrat, is that after that point, we had three political movements basically vying for power within the two-party system. You had the neoliberal center that ran from the Romney wing of the Republican Party through the Clinton and Obama wing of the Democratic Party. You had the Trumpian right, proto-fascist, authoritarian, anti-small d Democratic movement, sort of modeled in the same way after a lot of the authoritarian leaders around the world. And you had the progressives on the left. And I saw with an incumbent Democrat in the White House, a career moderate centrist, longtime senator who sought to find compromise with the Republicans throughout his career, actually was apparently an understudy of Scoop Jackson going all the way back with the neoconservatives in that office, a defender of the U.S. empire, that we would not have a progressive champion on the center stage of American politics in the presidential race, as we had in 2016. And that was instrumental to the rising up of the progressive movement that, of course, sparked the Squad in 2018, the expansion of the Squad in 2020 and 2022, Bernie coming even closer to winning the nomination in 2020 after he was ahead in Nevada. What would happen to our movement? And I have been very, very worried about that. And so what we have tried to do at PDA, and I've been in dialogue with the organizers at RootsAction, always very supportive of their trajectory, for us to sign on at PDA officially onto the Don't Run Joe and Step Aside Joe, because it's talking about a political office. I would have had to channel it probably through the membership of PDA because we're that kind of grassroots up organization, and I feared we wouldn't have the votes for it. So it was better to sort of support and say, hey, wow, look at these guys at RootsAction. They're on top of this. And boy, have the polls over the last few months shown that to be correct. Okay. What we've also done, though, and this is why it's a complex night, we have a reformulated Young Progressive Democrats of America. And as you may know, the one space of the constituency within the national electorate who have drawn to Marianne Williamson's campaign, a two-time Bernie Sanders surrogate in 2016 and 2020, but somebody who a lot of the progressive left have not gotten behind or supported, And I think there's some support within the ranks of PDA, but nothing approaching our 60% threshold for an endorsement. Well, the young people, she had gained considerable traction on, a huge following on TikTok. And so when YPDA was reformulated, they decided to have a national youth town hall with Marianne Williamson tonight. On the hope that maybe that candidacy or something else could really show to the American public the necessity of this third political tendency, the one that has a promise of having a liberatory politics in our time in the domestic United States, and to really produce the kind of change that we need and want in American society, to continue to lift it up across this election cycle. What form that takes, I don't know. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult to get Democrats to pay attention to third-party candidates, but we amongst ourselves have to solve that riddle. I think the RootsAction team has done a tremendous service in highlighting the inadequacies of Biden for progressives, and we have to come up with a strategy for elevating the progressive message, making sure it's not only still alive and center stage in 2026 and 2028, but actually has a winning electoral season and grows and expands in the 24 cycle. I think we need to do that. We can do it because we have the right answers to the solutions to the issues that are a problem in our center stage right now in the American political discourse. But how do we achieve that? I think that's something we all have to work together on, organize, and create solidarity across this electoral cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan Minsky. Our next speaker is India Walton, a former Democratic Party nominee for mayor of Buffalo, New York, and currently senior strategist with RootsAction.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I appreciate everything that's been said so far. I think one thing that is most striking to me is how much effort Democrats put into defeating progressive Democrats. I think that aside from the fact that the Biden administration has been a resounding failure policy-wise, has failed to protect the reproductive rights of women, has failed to protect families. We're still in the midst of a pandemic. Folks are still sick, folks are still struggling, and the president has arbitrarily decided that the pandemic is over. All of the economic supports and protections that we experienced under the pandemic have expired and not been renewed. And that's a cause for concern for a lot of folks. And I think that the Democrats are getting it 100% wrong, thinking that we can be scared into voting for Joe Biden again. I think in 2020, Joe Biden was a bitter pill that we had to swallow at the time because we were under just everything was a siege, right? And it was sort of under the assumption that we would be able to push Biden further left, right? There were promises of student debt cancellation and expanding Medicare, and we've not seen any of those things come to fruition. So for people like me, average, everyday, working class folks who really value the democratic process, not having seen the material conditions of my life improve in any way under the Biden administration, and also seeing primaries be canceled, seeing, this sort of Rose Garden strategy that's being used against other candidates who really want to push a Democratic primary where the president is refusing to debate, refusing to acknowledge that there are any other options, right? And the dominant wing, the corporate wing of the Democratic Party supporting that. I just know that folks are tired of having to settle for the lesser of two evils. And at this point, we want someone who's actually good. We want someone who's good on domestic policy. We want someone who's good on foreign policy. We want people with compassion and empathy who are going to put people and planet over profits. And I think that is going to come out in this next election, right? And, personally, I am struggling. I can't in good consciousness knowing that I am a queer Black single mother of 4 Black boys, right? I can't in good consciousness just stay home, but we have to do more in protest of what corporate Democrats are doing to us as a people, right? I'm stockpiling plan B. We are building out our mutual aid networks here in Buffalo because we know that when it comes down to it, we're going to have to take care of each other. But I think that one way or another, we as a movement have to figure out a way to be organized enough to overcome the centuries of planning of the ruling and political class that is not allowing us to come together as the proletariat, as the working class, and find the things that connect us and stop allowing the narrative to be spun that it's an us versus them thing, when really it kind of is an us versus them thing, right? And us meaning the working class and the people who really keep this country going. So I'm just looking forward to continuing to build, right? And thank you, Karen, for raising, like, politics are local, right? Like, we can put as much emphasis as we want to on the presidential elections, but we need to make sure that we secure school boards, city councils, county legislatures, and state government, and really hold their feet to the fire also, and making sure that we are delivering for our people. So that's all I have for now.
Thank you, India Walton. And our next speaker is Madinah Wilson-Anton, a Delaware state representative and a Ceasefire Now activist. She recently participated in a high-profile hunger strike outside the White House and led a march on Biden's house in Delaware calling for a ceasefire in Gaza.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm taking notes here on the side because I agree with so much of what's been said already, and I don't want to repeat too much, but I think Jeff's right. And I think one of the things that I want to point out about his comments is that activist burnout, right? Like, we push through the burnout constantly, but when there's nothing exciting to help you push through it, I mean, I'm expecting a lot of people to kind of sit back and just say, well, I'm going to take time for myself and I'm just going to pull away, right? Which is what we do not need to happen. I think part of what we should be doing is more of what we've been doing. So a lot of the talk I've heard this evening so far is about the local. I'm a state rep, so of course I'm going to say state and local is super important. But what was said earlier, I think Karen mentioned it, India mentioned it, state and local is where a lot of policies are made that impact our daily lives, right? And so what I've been encouraging people who are feeling that disillusionment to do is to turn your energy to those races. But one of the main things that I think I'm going to try to wrap it up on is just the fact that because of that burnout, because we often are focusing all of our attention on the electoral, I think it's really important that we underscore just how important it is to focus on the issue-based campaigns, right? So the Ceasefire Now campaign that's happening, that's an issue campaign, right? We're not asking people to vote for anyone in particular. We're asking everyone who can to either sign on to a piece of legislation or get someone else to sign on to a piece of legislation. And that effort has brought together people of all backgrounds, of all classes, even. And so I think that kind of strategy is probably what we need to be thinking about more long term. The right has done a very effective job of playing the long game. And they had certain things in mind as to what they wanted to do. They wanted to get rid of reproductive rights. They wanted to get rid of LGBTQ rights, and they've been effective at that. And so for us to focus only on electoral, we're gonna keep losing if we keep doing that. So I think, local conversations, supporting organizations that do grassroots work, that actually are talking to people at their front doors about the issues that are important to them and explaining to them how they can get involved, giving them that motivation to stay involved despite maybe not necessarily seeing any return right away, right? It's really difficult work. But I think that's really where our focus needs to be. I'm curious to hear from the panelists as we continue this conversation, what we think is going to happen, what we'd like to happen when it comes to the presidential election. But I think regardless of what happens, whether it's our best case scenario or our worst case scenario, it's not going to be great. So what do we do in the meantime, right? I think that's kind of the other question that we should be thinking about. So thank you all so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to continuing to chat this evening.
Well, thank you, Madinah Wilson-Anton. And actually, Madinah, your last point really leads into our panel discussion here about concretely, I suppose, in the next half dozen months or so, what are the best approaches for progressive activists, mindful that there are a lot of races up and down the ballot, there are a lot of issue focuses that are essential, regardless of candidate names. Still in all, there is a presidential race. We know how powerful presidents are. So I'd like to toss this open to panelists, specific as you can be, given the unknowns looking ahead. What are some of the very best approaches that come to mind for progressive activists dealing with the realities between now and a November presidential race? And I'll look and see if there are any hands, or just go ahead and jump in. See, I have the easy job. I get to ask questions that have no sufficient answers. But
Well,
I am going to persist, given that we don't have any great alternatives, perhaps. Karen.
well, I mean, in the first place, we have primaries coming up in many of the states, and I want to preface this by saying, yes, we can't count on the people at the top. We got to take care of ourselves, and we got to take care of each other, because they ain't taking care of us. So the mutual aid, that is a real thing, and it's something that we need because we need community, and otherwise we're disconnected, it's chaos, and that's what we have to choose. We have to choose community. So, but beyond that, we have primaries coming up, and I can't emphasize enough that in terms of the electoral arena for progressives, the primaries are it. I mean, because quite often, by the time you get to the generals, it's a pile of shit. Forget, sorry about my language, but everyone knows this. So if we have a chance at things, it's to be involved in those primaries where we do know that there are some good progressives that are running. And this is where it's going to make a difference, because guess what, folks? The same bad actors, the same evil people that are backing and funding the DFMIs, the APACs, and so on, that are in the national elections, they're involved in the state races too.
Yeah.
And so we have our own heroes at the state races, and if we want to see them one day advance to federal offices, we need to make sure that they do well in the primaries at the state level. Without that, it then becomes extremely, if we think we're demoralized now, especially with the millennial and Gen Z cohort of the electorate being the most dominant cohort of the now, that age group surpassed boomers in 2020. If we want to see more demoralization, then we won't be involved in the primaries, because that is the only chance really that you're going to keep them engaged in that electoral arena. So that I can't stress that enough. After that, they don't give a shit about us. We've got to take care of each other. This is the mutual aid, but yeah, the primaries are it for us. That's our jam as progressives.
Oh, Max.
I think that in determining our best approach, I think we have to look at where we are relative to our different opponents. The right has had a power building strategy that they've been implementing for 60 years. And this current iteration of the progressive social justice movement that has a power building strategy of building up from the grassroots and fighting for governing power is maybe 10 or 12, 15 years old in terms of some of the key groups that are pioneering that kind of strategy. So we're not going to get everything we want in the next election cycle. We have to be real about that. We have to play the long game, and we have to build up the kind of infrastructure at the local levels that begins to match. We have to rebuild the labor movement, repoliticize the Black church. Those have been historically the mass organizations that have anchored the left. And right now we're outgunned by the white evangelical churches. There's a mass organization for the right. And we have to think hard about what are the conditions that will allow us to do that long-term work, So 2 points to me that are concrete. One, we have to position ourselves that we are the fiercest opponents of MAGA. We cannot cede that ground to the centrist Democrats. We have to conduct our struggle with the centrist Democrats in a way that points out to every constituency that we are in the forefront of the fight against the American version of fascism that MAGA represents. Because there are constituencies out there, even though fear is not enough, there are constituencies out there, important ones. The labor movement does not want to give up the Biden NLRB for an NLRB that's in the pocket of the Koch brothers. And we have to position ourselves as the fighters for that and not give up the point about, talking about the danger of MAGA. MAGA is an existential threat to the constituencies we care about. The second concrete thing, I do think that in the next 6 months, the biggest fight is going to be the spin about what happens to the Congress people who are being attacked by AIPAC. That's going to be the fight about what's happening in the Democratic Party. Sympathy for Palestine has been moving our way in the last 3 years. A lot of centrist Democrats don't take a position on this, not because of the ideology, but because of fear of the Israel lobby. And we have to break that fear. The base of the Democratic Party has already moved. It's a vast majority for the ceasefire and a slim majority more pro-Palestinian than pro-Israeli. That fight is going to affect the balance of forces on every other issue, including the policy of the Biden administration. So I think positioning ourselves as the fiercest opponents of MAGA and not being afraid that when we talk about how dangerous they are, that we're somehow legitimizing the centrist Democrats. We're seizing that banner ourselves. And we want to defend those pro-ceasefire Congress people.
Alan, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. There's so much I could say about everything that everyone has said, and the contributions are all quite brilliant. But I just wanted to highlight my analysis of the centrist Democrats, and again, the neoliberal center. It's basically a zombie ideology. It has been since 2007. However, all of society's structures are in place to operate in the neoliberal context. But clearly it is basically political conservatism. I mean, Trumpian guys are reactionaries, and they're conserving the status quo that's been in place largely since Reagan and Thatcher with the neoliberal economic model, which, by the way, includes weak labor unions and U.S. global hegemony is overseeing, of course, these new trade pacts that came about in the NAFTA going forward. But it's since 07-08, it has basically not been able to recreate itself in any way, shape, or form that it promises a better life for the large majority of Americans. It's work very hard, barely keep your head above water, and have your social services and public services ever diminished with each round of austerity. And Joe Biden, moved a little bit. The compact with Sanders moved him a little bit. The pandemic and the fact that he had legislation in the wake of the pandemic moved him. But just look at something like Medicare privatization. That's just so in the mainstream of the Democratic Party and Joe Biden, and it's been going full force. And that's going to be how they take inheritance away from younger Americans, from families that could pass on inheritance. They're trying to grab it from people in their last years of their life through the privatization of Medicare, like Medicare Advantage. So neoliberalism is still apace, but nobody likes it, nobody believes in it, and therefore to point, just what I wanted to say off of what Max said, the center Democrats, they are going to hand the control of the society over to the right wing, because when they suffocate the progressive left, and all anger then is with the right, and the centrist Democrats are the smug and status quo, no one's going to elect them. And you see, it's part of the lure now of the right wing anger to a broader working class, broader segments of the American working class, has happened in the last few years. And yeah, the progressive Democrats, the progressives, the left, the only people with the solutions that the American people wants. If they stomp us out and suffocate us, I think the centrists will just lead to the election of the far right in the United States.
India.
Yeah, I'm also particularly interested in the building of a viable third party. I think the two-party system just isn't working. And, thinking back to my run for mayor of Buffalo in 2021, we did everything by the rules, right? We won the primary, and I became the Democratic nominee. And then what happened? The Democrats went and got the MAGA Republicans in order to keep their power, right? So this is about the enclosure and maintenance of wealth and power, no matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. They use the same playbook. They're using a lot of the same talking points. So I think that, long term, we really should be considering, how we coalesce around a third party, where we would be able to support a Cornel West or a Jill Stein with more than 2% of the vote.
Madinah.
I'll try to be quick because I know there's other questions, but I agree with Alan's hypothesis, and I think we've seen it happen in other countries, right, where neoliberal policies bring fascism. Unfortunately, we've seen it already here, and I think what we can do about that is when we have those conversations with people at the door, when we're having our grassroots organizations building power in communities, that we make that distinction that Max was talking about, that we are against those policies that where you saw your job went to another country, where you saw the factory in your neighborhood go away. We're against those policies, but corporate Democrats, they support those policies. And I think what India is sharing is something that I'm getting to see firsthand as a member of the Delaware Democratic House. The Democrats, the corporate Democrats, will fight a progressive so much harder than they will ever fight a Republican. And so I think it's really important that when we're having those conversations with Democratic voters who don't know that dynamic even exists, that we bring them into that conversation, share that with them. When I have those conversations with voters, they're shocked, first off, and they're like, wait, all those great ideas you just shared with me about how we can fix our problems, Democrats disagree with you on that? Right? So I think those conversations are really important for us to have with the average voter who doesn't have the time to follow the news and read all these articles and things that we all, might find enjoyment in, right? I think that's a big part of our long-term strategy is painting that picture for them. What is a corporate Democrat? It's not just Hillary Clinton. It's also that nice lady who came to your HOA meeting.
Well, we know that unless he decides to spend more time with his family or something untoward happens or he's raptured to another planet, Joe Biden will head the ticket. And one of our challenges is to make sure that the Trump gang doesn't gain control of the executive branch again, at the same time that we don't seem to be defending the status quo that Biden embodies. And I wonder how that could best be accomplished in terms of messaging and organizing. Jeff, I think I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm ready to be the one who gets accused of being a liberal, but I agree with everything that's been said about, defending our state house progressives, defend the squad. But if anyone asks me in October, and it comes down to Biden and Trump, I I'm going to say if you live in the 38 or 40 states, this is a position Norm and I have taken in past elections. If you live in the 38 or 40 states where the D's are going to win big or the R's are going to win big, cast a protest vote. But I live in New York and I can do that. But I grew up in Michigan, and it's a swing state. It's a 50-50 state. And if I were there in Michigan or advising my relatives and friends and neighbors who I know from Michigan, I would say you got to hold your nose this time, vote for the neoliberal against the neo-fascist. It's not a great answer, but I am agreeing with what everyone's saying, that our main focus has got to be on candidates we really believe in. But I'm willing to make that comment for people in Michigan, and I'll be telling the people in Michigan, hold your nose and vote for Biden because you got to keep the neo-fascists out. So I'll wait for all the chat attacks on me as the hopeless liberal.
Karen.
Well, you won't have to wait for the chat, Jeff, because no, I'm not going to do that. So this is what I know. I'm interested in getting that electorate, as I say, the younger generation who is so demoralized and doesn't see the relevance anymore of being engaged, to the polls over issues that I know that they would care about, and to talk about what's at stake if they don't. Because the election is more than the presidency. I guess where I've been for some time is I've moved past the whether or not we should be talking to people about trying to get them to convince them to vote for a war criminal, and so I'm moving past that. What I'm doing is I'm talking to them about, for instance, at the door, did you know that this person has said repeatedly that if he gets in, he is going to be for a book ban on all these certain things that they can relate to, things that is going to affect them, perhaps their family members, their kids, and so on, in the following year when that legislation takes place. Those are the things that because I honestly feel right now that there are people that have made up their mind that they're not going to be participating, that they're not going to engage right now. I realize we're still a few months away, but the way that we need to start talking to them is about those policies that are going to impact them directly, as in the next year, and it is going to be felt. And so I think that's we have to have faith in the fact that we have a pretty informed cohort in the younger generation now, more than we ever have, and we need to talk to them from that place. I've also read a couple of things. I just want to take the time. How do we put ourselves when we're at the doors, saying that we're working against genocide and fascism? That I think that we need to be able to say that. We need to be able to have confidence in those state policymakers, that if we're going to advocate for them, don't let them off the hook either. They need to be able to answer that question, or they're not going to get our labor. They're not going to have us work for them. It's one thing to vote for them. They need our labor in order to get themselves elected. And that is one of the litmus tests that we should definitely put forth there to these candidates that want to run for those offices at the state level. The last thing I'll say, we need to be able to make very clear to the establishment Democrats that we have no intention of being props in their production show here. And that includes the convention coming up in Chicago. I mean, we should talk about that. I mean, that is one of the things that I can't believe, that this is like 68 all over again. Anyways.
Madinah.
I agree with both of you, I think. I don't know if anybody in the chat agrees with that statement, but I think what what an individual progressive does in October is not the same question as what progressive organizations should be doing right now and in October. I think one thing we should be remembering and reminding corporate Dems of is the fact that we win the elections for them, right? And they expect Black women to come out and get them elected, and they expect young people to come out and get them elected. And so I think what we should be doing right now is allowing them to court us, just like the people in Iowa get to do, right? Win our votes. I'm not voting for Biden. I'm not encouraging anyone to vote for Biden as a public figure, right? I'm not using my platform to get him any votes. He should be getting the votes for himself. And so I think that's how kind of as an ecosystem we should be approaching it. Now in October, if you go into a booth in that time period, right, and you're thinking about who to vote for, if you're voting at all, I think that's a different question. But I don't think that we should allow the Biden administration, his campaign, corporate Dems to think they have us. I think they should be working until the very last moment to win our vote. Whether that's on the ceasefire, whether that's on labor rights, whatever it is, they should be courting the left, and we shouldn't be ceding any of our leverage.
In just a few minutes, we're going to be having some of the questions that people have been typing into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and those questions will be presented to the panel. In the few minutes we have till the top of the hour, I want to ask one question that maybe should be asked more. Ultimately, in our messaging about voting and how we describe voting, should it be portrayed as a tool or an act of conscience or some combination?
I think it's a strategic tool. For me, it's not an act of conscience. That's why I was saying, and I know people that are active in Jewish Voice for Peace in Michigan that are going to end up pulling the lever for Ceasefire Joe. I agree with.
I think that's genocide, Joe.
Oh, what did I say?
You said ceasefire, Joe.
Yeah, yeah, the opposite of what I said.
Speak it into existence, Jeff.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe if we keep saying it. But I'm sort of with Madinah. What's more important is, what do we do as political organizations? What are we saying as organizations to the masses? And, RootsAction, we've got an email list over 1 million people. What's more important than what we do in the privacy of the booth, and I would encourage people in Michigan or Wisconsin to vote Biden, it's what are we telling the truth about corporate Democrats? Are we advocating a real program that would advance the interest of working people? So to me, what's far more important than what people do in the voting booth as individuals is what we do as organizations, as movements, telling the truth about the neo-fascist on the right wing and the corporate militarist Democrats in the centrist.
Any other comments on that point? Did I see your hand, Alan, or are you stretching?
Yeah, I can give some pretty maximum cynicism here. I do believe I definitely practice it being a tool. There were three, I think PDA's contending with Joe Biden being the likely nominee going back a few months. We were very active, and actually were a part of just a 3-group coalition, with Debt Collective being one of them, that worked with Ilhan Omar's office to write the first student debt cancellation bill, universal student debt cancellation bill. People forget that Bernie didn't endorse universal student debt in 2016, only in 2020, and it grew and became a huge issue. So there were 3 things that I think the National Democratic Party needs to run on, that if they win the House back and hold on to 50 senators and Biden wins, and I'm going to get to the relationship of this to Gaza in a second, they need to codify Roe v. Wade, or the legal equivalent exactly, full rights for women to control their bodies, and no holds barred, right? And they're committed to that, supposedly. And they will have a filibuster carve out. They're supposedly, the National Democratic Party is committed to that. Same with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. and another voting related piece of legislation. So those two things get passed. And then third would be the student debt level of debt relief that Biden had outlined initially, you know, 20,000 if he had a Pell Grant, 10,000 otherwise. John Tester threw that overboard, though. He would be the necessary 50th vote, and he wouldn't support that with a filibuster. That would go through reconciliation, but you need 50 votes, and he would not vote for it. So he'd have to work on Tester at this hour to get that back. Okay, I do think the Gaza situation complicates for PDA how much we'll push that, even if we do push that, because this is where voting for conscience comes in as a live question, which is for, you know, particularly in one swing state with a huge Arab American population is Michigan. And we all have seen the reports that have come out of Michigan. And, you know, I got to do an event with Rashida in Arizona that got canceled by Arizona State University just, you know, about 6 weeks ago. And I could tell that, you know, she's certainly not ready to, wasn't that at that hour ready to turn a corner or have any kind of discussion about the pragmatics of the November 2024 vote and supporting Joe Biden. And she's you know, she was somebody who termed out of the Michigan legislature, a very committed Democrat in her political career. And I can sense that's where she was at. So I can only imagine in the community how strong the resistance would be to voting for Biden. And Jeff, as a Michigander, you're going to have to come up against that. Why did I bring up maximum cynicism? Okay. I think if we could, if Gaza hadn't happened, I wish that was the case, of course, but it's reality, and that's a stupid thing to say to us. But if we were going to pursue those 3 50-vote, you know, pass the Senate and get Biden to sign them into law, that would be a very powerful victory for progressives, because the centrist Democratic Party has and continues to use, for instance, a woman's right to choose and control over her own body as like this political catnip. And you know that the mainstream Democratic consultants, they want to have this never resolved so the Democratic Party the centrist Democrats can continue to win elections. But we could take that and make it American law. And right now they're committed to it. So they win this cycle and they get to codify Roe v. Wade, John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which of course strengthens democracy, which strengthens our hand with the political point of view that the American public actually supports policy by policy, the progressives politically. So I think that would be a winning strategy, but I do think Gaza complicates things because, you know, how do you make a case to Arab Americans to vote for Joe Biden right now? We're going to have to see where things stand, but you know, I'm still not healed from what I've seen from Biden over the past period in terms of PDA making a really strong case to vote for Joe Biden. We're certainly not there yet right now.
Okay. We're going to transition to some questions that have come in. I saw one directed to the panel, what is PDA? So I can mention PDA is Progressive Democrats of America. And on behalf of the whole team at RootsAction, I just want to thank all the participants. And we invite you, of course, to go to the RootsAction webpage, rootsaction.org. If you take any action on the webpage, then we'll know in particular what you're interested in. And signing up is good, or taking an action, because we're a network for action, independent of any political parties. We're an issue orientation. We're now going to shift to the Q&A. And I do want to mention that we made a choice that we didn't want to have what would have been literally hundreds of questions flashing on the screen or comments. We really wanted to be able to concentrate on hearing what the 6 panelists were saying. So we didn't have that discourse going on continually on the screen, but we will log all the questions. We'll get back to people, of course, to the extent we can. And now I want to introduce Sam Rosenthal, who not only helped coordinate and set up our entire event this evening, but also is the political director of RootsAction. So Sam, take it away.
Thanks, Norman. Hi, everyone. Thanks to all our panelists. This has been a great conversation so far. So what I've been doing in the background here is I've been looking at questions that you all have been sending in and sort of compiling and collating them so that we can address some of the sort of top questions that we're seeing and top issues that are on everyone's mind. So I'll, read these sort of compiled questions, and again, open to any panelist. So, raise your hand or just unmute and jump in. So the first question we're getting is, we've touched on already a bit, but it's really about, aren't we helping Trump by criticizing Biden? Or put another way, how can we be critical of Biden while still also being more critical or critical enough of the far right that we keep defeating the far right, as the main focus of our activity?
I just want to clarify what I just said, because it does follow from the question. We will run our national campaign against Donald Trump if we don't have the appetite to promote Joe Biden. We would never be not encouraging people to pull the lever for the Democrat. But in terms of having a positive, campaign language around Biden, for me at least as an executive director, I can't go there right now because of what's been going on in Gaza and his complicity. Just wanted to clarify that. But we will definitely run to defeat Trump and to elect Tester, if he goes with the student debt, Tester, Brown, and Gallegos, so that we have the 50-seat majority, the House, and the presidency, so he can pass those three measures.
I think what's hurt the Democratic Party is no one's told the truth about Biden's weakness, Biden's inability to get things through. He couldn't get Build Back Better through. His student debt has not delivered. He claimed he was going to advance Medicare. He didn't. And then we all know what's happened in Gaza and other foreign policy problems from Biden. So I believe if you tell the truth about Biden and then say, the bigger threat are the neo-fascists, we should never window dress. We should never beat around the bush when we're talking about Biden. I think voters and activists respect us if we're truthful. So I don't think we've hurt Biden at all. He's weak. The emperor has no clothes. We're just telling the truth and trying to work from that problem, the Biden problem, to a solution that advances working people's interests and the interests of people overseas that don't want to be bombed mercilessly. So I've never believed this thing that I believe the ones who have hurt the Biden or Democratic effort to defeat the neo-fascists are the ones who go to the New York Times anonymously as members of Congress and say Biden's a big drag on the rest of us Democrats, and they're unwilling to say that publicly. Those are the people that have undermined the Democrats or the progressive ability to defeat the neo-fascist right.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Any other panelists on this question? So great. So the next question we're getting is about, or a series of questions is about third parties and protest candidates. And I wonder if panelists could just speak to, we're seeing a lot of different opinions on whether these are viable avenues for organizing tonight, I think among the panelists and within the questions we're getting. But I wonder if you all could weigh in on what you think the viability is of sort of a third party movement or supporting a protest candidate, and whether, in your opinion, that's a good use of our organizing time and energy, or if we should invest that time and energy elsewhere.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, in 2024, I think it's a mistake to think that if Jill Stein gets 2% of the vote, that's a good thing. I have argued with the Green Party since the late 1990s that they need to elect mayors and city council members and state house. That's how you build a party. They've been unwilling to do that. They focus always on every 4 years on the presidency. So, I mean, if Jill Stein gets 2% in Wisconsin and Trump becomes the president because of Wisconsin, I don't want to have to explain what her strategy was or what the Green Party strategy was. So I'm a believer. We had a great mayor in New Paltz who was Green Party. He was the first one to marry same-sex couples at City Hall. I'm a big believer in third party and independent politics at the local level, at even the state level. But the idea that running for president and possibly helping Trump defeat Biden, I'm not sure that's a great idea. And that's why I said earlier, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, all those swing states, I think third party 2024 at a national level is a huge error. But I'm not against building up third party independent politics from the grassroots and local politics. And many of those elections aren't partisan.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Jeff. I think that, especially considering it's 2024 now, right? I think that somehow we're always just a little bit late to the party, right? And when I talk about building third parties, like it's a local and state level thing. And it's aspirational, but we're talking about a 10, 20, 30-year trajectory, right? Like we need to be planning for the future of progressives, like our opposition is planning, right? Lining people up through a pipeline, and also like having our arguments in private and coming out in public as a united front, and just to stop tearing ourselves down and revealing our playbook too soon, and really just being strategic about the way we do build infrastructure in local third parties, and get our people in position to seek higher office.
Thanks, India and Jeff. Do any other panelists want to speak to that point?
This is Karen. So I think that the way that we cut across all that is to frame it differently. We need for our advocacy to be issues-based. And once we can connect the issues that we are advocating for to the candidates that champion them, then this is how people can begin to think about it. Quite honestly, maybe I'm the Debbie Downer here, but like I don't think that this talk about third parties, and I agree with what has been said. I think they should be focused on local and state to build the party from the bottom up. But I think that the danger that we have really right now is that we need to make the case for why they need to be, they need to stay engaged in politics, period. Because that's the what we're seeing right now is a great demoralization by the electorate, and more specifically by the younger generation, for why there's a great cynicism there, and we need to be able to make the case for why they need to stay engaged. And when we do that, when we stay with the issues, and then we can connect them to the candidates, that we make really a high threshold to meet for them for our support. This is when we can really exercise our power. This is how we flex our power, and we have to do it on our terms that way.
Thanks, Karen. And just one more question, and I think if we can just go around to each of our panelists quickly. A lot of folks are writing and saying that they feel demoralized. They feel like they don't know what to do this year. They've spent the last 8 years or so since 2016 heavily invested in the progressive movement, knocking doors every year, phone banking, really giving a lot of their time to this movement, and they're feeling a bit lost as to what to do next. So maybe if each of our panelists can just go around and trying to end on a hopeful note here, tell us a thing that either you yourself are looking forward to engaging in on the activism front this coming year, or that you would recommend to others to get involved in if they don't know where they should take the energy for the progressive movement next. And we'll start, I'll try to go in reverse alphabetical order. We'll start with Madinah.
Oh man, I was going to write some notes down of ideas, but okay, so I'll start by saying those feelings are 100% valid, and I think we all should be feeling that way. As to what I'm excited about, there are a couple different local candidates in Delaware that are running against corporate Dems, and I'm excited to support them, even though it's going to put me in a tough spot again. But I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to have conversations with those candidates to help them know what they're getting into, and kind of get them oriented before they get put into the, what do they call that? Brainwashing machine of when you come in. So I'm excited about that. Another thing that I think we should be thinking about, right, is the right's been doing this for decades. We're not going to see the wins that we want to see overnight, right? So what I always encourage people to do is sustain community. So you shouldn't only be seeing progressives when you're door knocking. You should be finding a space in your local community where you're also watching movies and you're talking about whatever sports team you like. You know, maybe here it's the Eagles and they just lost, so we're all commiserating together, right? I think that's a really important piece, is that community space. Like, we shouldn't just be talking about politics when we come together. We should be getting to know each other and building relationships that way. So that's what keeps movements going, I think. So that's always my advice for folks that are feeling demoralized. My political friends threw me a party to lift my spirits, right? And that's exactly the kind of support and solidarity that I think we all need.
Thanks, Medina. And we'll go to India next.
I think that is spot on. We have to continue to develop relationships and build community outside of the electoral cycle. I would also say that burnout is real. And if you need to take a step back, then feel free to do so. Like, none of us should be martyrs in this. And I know that there's so much riding on it and we have so much to lose and also so much to gain. But you can't pour from an empty vessel and you can't knock on doors if you're dead. So I'll just put that out there. And the thing that I'm most looking forward to is really just digging into grassroots advocacy, continuing to organize, right? There's more than one way to skin a cat. And what we have not won electorally, we can definitely still advocate for on the policy front. And like I said, just really building out a robust mutual aid network and celebrating the small wins, right? A part of my mayoral platform was citywide composting, and they laughed at me. And this year, our city is piloting a citywide composting project. So, like, we're claiming victory on all fronts. We're celebrating even the small wins, and just using any little entry point into the door to make sure that we make our voices heard. And yes, to sports, I am a Bills fan, and we're doing quite well. So there's that.
Okay, and I think Alan's next, and maybe leave the sports commentary. It's getting sort of heated in here already, so.
I live in Los Angeles and nobody cares about the Rams, but they played a good game and lost to the Lions. Probably more Lions fans in Southern California now than Rams fans. I suppose I'll end where I started. By the way, I want to say I'm just honored to be with India Walton. And I can only imagine what you experienced in that election was incredibly difficult. I'm very close to Nina Turner, as a number of people on the call are. I saw her at the Reverend Jackson Emergency Summit in Gaza, and I think both you and Nina had experiences where, if it's any consolation, I think they were signature examples of where power politics are in our society now, and how intractable the mainstream of the Democratic Party is to progressive change. And along those lines, then, how can we continue to make clear to the public that no, Joe Biden did not fulfill Bernie Sanders' agenda, even at its most large form when it was 3.6 trillion. I suppose Bernie had a 6 trillion version, but that was never released to the public. So 3.6 trillion, Build Back Better. Still didn't have single payer universal health care, right? Still was running all of our, government largesse to make the health system affordable by basically giving money out to private insurance companies. Our vision for the society we live in is constitutively different than the Democratic Party that we're aligned with now to preserve small d democracy, which is, in a pretty polluted or perverted manner in the United States with the domination of money. But nonetheless, obviously the Trumpian Steve Bannon type offensive against the Democratic Republic is real. And so we can't make the mistakes they made in Germany between the centrists and the left, allowing the fascists to come in. But we have to keep alive the in the absence of, I know that what everybody's saying is so on point about local elections, but as you do focus on those, and you know, Karen Bernal, I got nothing but incredible reverence for the work you do in all of your activism and organizing here in California. But the public does pay attention to the national presidential, you know, spectacle like nothing else, right? In fact, the last election, Trump and Biden, the most voted in election by orders of magnitude from any presidential election in history. And it really sets the agenda of where the national political dialogue is. And I really think we have to do what everybody's been saying about, you know, the distinction to be made between who we are and the mainstream of the Democratic Party, locally, state, nationally, presidentially, and keep alive in front of the general public. Where we want to take our society, because we understand that's where the majority of the population wants to take it to.
Thanks, Alan. We have Max next.
From the collapse of the Rainbow Coalition until 2015, the left in the United States was basically a protest movement. There were many very important protests, but it was basically a movement of opposition and what we were against. And the combination of Trump's election and Bernie's campaign turned a corner, and people started to think in terms of power. We had to get into politics. We weren't just going to be a protest movement. We were going to a movement that was going to contend for governing power. And we were going to run the country. We were going to lead a coalition, a majoritarian coalition, to change the direction of the country. And even though this is a demoralizing moment for many people, the fact is, since 2016, the nexus of organizations that have moved in that direction and are talking about how to win political power with a full spectrum arsenal that includes electoral work, base building, fighting for public opinion, demonstrations, building up media and infrastructure. It's not where we need to be by a long shot, but it's way, way more advanced than it was in 2016. The movement has also learned something, not just from the experiences of our own side, but from the right wing and what they've managed to accomplish in 60 years. So there's the beginnings of a consensus about an outline for a path to power. We live in a society where a quick fix is the name of the game. If you're injured, take a pill, it'll take care of you. The combination of quick fix thinking and the urgency of the moment leads to these big mood swings where people are incredibly excited. Bernie's going to win. We're going to have the presidency. A year or two later, I'm totally demoralized. Nothing has worked. It's totally understandable in this thing, but it's not how politics should be done once you've been in politics for a while. You keep your eye on the long game. I think that there's better prospects than there's been in a long time for a convergence of the forces on the left that are thinking in these terms. We've got RootsAction, we've got PDA, we've got Working Families Party, we've got a bunch of left forces in labor movement, Sunrise, M4BL, Mi Gente, a whole range of organizations in that political space. And when I vote for a candidate, I'm voting for the strategy to implement the strategy of that path to governing power. If that candidate's going to give better conditions for the organizations and the movement I'm part of to fight in, I'm voting for them. So when I vote for Joe Biden in the fall, if we're stuck with him as the nominee, I'm not voting for Joe Biden. I'm voting for better conditions for the social justice movement to get closer to being the dominant force in the Democratic Party or whatever happens in terms of party realignment. And I'm hopeful because I think there's thousands and thousands of people that are starting to think that way. We have our differences, we have our different emphases, but I don't compare it to just 2 years ago. I compare it to where we were in 2015 when we weren't even thinking about these things. And now we are. And not just thinking about it, there's plenty of groups that are really doing a hell of a lot about it. I'm old now, and I'm getting in behind all the younger people that are really making a difference and moving that thing along. It's incredible energy out there. So I'm ever the optimist on this, but because of a long-range vision.
Thank you, Max, and thanks for your optimism. It's heartening to hear. And we have Jeff next.
Yeah, I've been honored to be part of this panel. The panel is inspiring. At RootsAction, as I mentioned in 2020, we weren't saying vote for Biden. We were saying vote Trump out, then challenge Biden. 6 words. And then when Biden got in, our campaign was no honeymoon for Biden. We were making demands. We were resisting certain appointments, his horrible hawks on foreign policy. But in this issue of demoralization, it's important that we take inspiration. I take inspiration that there's a state legislator in Delaware named Medina who's doing a ceasefire, a hunger strike for the people of Gaza, or that Karen Bernal out in California is working for a progressive state senator. And I want to say that I can take inspiration even from electoral defeats, because the Nina Turner, defeat and the India Walton defeat at the ballot box was complete inspiration to me. That there was India Walton out of Buffalo. I hadn't heard of India Walton, and it's really an inspiration to see these electoral campaigns and these grassroots campaigns, even if they don't win, because they will one day win. I'll leave you with a quote from I.F. Stone, one of the greatest progressive independent journalists, who used to say, when he was talking to people much younger than him during the Vietnam War, the anti-war era, he would say, look, you're going to have to lose and lose and lose and lose again. You have to figure out how to enjoy yourself while you're losing, knowing that because you struggled, someday you might not be here, someday we're going to win. And that's what I.F. Stone used to say to young people coming into the anti-Vietnam War movement. And it's something that I think we all need to remember.
Thank you, Jeff. And finally, we have Karen.
Well, that was a perfect segue, Jeff, for where I'm coming from. And while I've been listening to optimism and sunshine, I guess I'm going to be the cloud. So, but I will tell you, I am an optimist in the end because I'm a fighter. And I want to start at something that Alan said, which is, it's true. People do follow the spectacle of presidential politics. But one thing that I know, and I was the Northern California field director for Bernie 2020. And, we won this state, right? So I was also the co-chair of the delegation to Philadelphia in 2016, where we did what we had to do because we weren't going to pay the money to go there just to be their little prop. And sometimes in the end, what you have to you is whether or not you're going to cooperate with the program. And we famously did not cooperate. But I want to say something to Alan about that spectacle. Yes, that is all true. And we have to know who we're talking with, who our audience is, and we have to meet them where they are. So sometimes that conversation is going to start like this. It's going to say, fuck Biden. And then from there, the conversation can start to where it needs to go for them to stay engaged and to know that, yes, this is a long game. It's not going to happen overnight, but here's why they have to stay in it, because this is what's at stake. What state are you from? Oh, did you know that this is on the ballot and this is on the ballot? And if you don't stay involved, this is what's going to happen to you. Okay, that is the kind of thing. And it doesn't necessarily, I guess I come from a place where I'm pretending right now that Biden has lost. So what do we do in that election that looks like that? And what do we do the next day? Because as you say, we have to be prepared to lose lose, lose. And I do think we are going to lose before we get to a better place. I also want to say there's something that Max said, which is really spot on about this long game and how we need to keep the pressure on around the issues. In 2016, I think some of you may remember that Black Lives Matter showed up during Bernie's campaign and went to places to really press him on the issue. And he didn't, at first, he didn't respond well, but he did after a while. And when we went through all of that, it was a moment of reckoning that he had to meet and that the campaign had to meet. But in the end, the campaign was made so much better for it. And that this showed in 2020. This showed that when we stick to the issues and we determine the terms of debate and we don't let up on that, we have to be ready to go into burning buildings on this. This is how we have to think, because it is war. When we are unrelenting like that, that is what moves people. And otherwise, how can people who are looking up to us to be the agents of change have faith in us if all we're doing is to play to not win? We have to fight, like we have to play to what I meant to say is we can't play to not lose. We have to play to win. And there's a different mindset that comes with playing to win as opposed to playing to not lose. We can't be cautious this way. Otherwise, we will always get lost in bottom lines and incrementalism. Believe me, I work in a building where daily what passes for success is often a sad thing. But what people respond to is our legislators and policymakers and leaders that aren't afraid to be bold, that aren't afraid to possibly lose over it, like they are there for one term, and they are going to do that. And this is what I think that we need to have back into the landscape, and we can't be only cautious and safe anymore. So yeah, we will lose. We will lose, but I think that we will fight this long fight, and we need to stay strong, and we need to keep it to the issues, because when you keep it to the issues, it's interesting who comes up. You can maybe get people to the right who consider themselves lifelong progressives that agree with you, and people that were party loyalists, Democratic Party loyalists, that are really the ones that you have to be careful of. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen, and I'll pass it back to Norman to close us out.
Yeah, as we say goodbye, the emphasis is on for now. We're saying goodbye for now. RootsAction is here to be part of a effort to transform the present and the future. And whether it's the DIY RootsAction petitions that you can launch your own and basically control by yourself to organize in the future that you can access on the website, whether it's getting and sharing our email blasts and our alerts and a lot of other resources at RootsAction, it's all about organizing for the short term, for the medium, and for the long. And just want to, on behalf of the RootsAction team that meets every week, a dozen of us, just to thank everybody who's on the panel, the hundreds of people who've been on live via Zoom and others via the live stream. Thanks for all that you are bringing to our world every day, because I know there's tremendous energy going on and we're part of it. And I'd like to close with a couple of my favorite quotes, for what it's worth. One from Antonio Gramsci about the need for pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. And of course, Gramsci was imprisoned under fascism, and we're looking at that sort of potential right now. So it's the optimism of the will that is really propelling our creativity and possibilities. And the other that came to mind as I was hearing people speak tonight goes like this. if you don't like the news, make some of your own. So goodbye for now, everybody, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Norman,
Thank
and
you.
everyone. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, everybody.
Great
Thank you.
quote from Scoop Nisker.
Yeah.
Yeah.